The woman reached Wolfpine Clearing just before the mountain disappeared behind snow. Torren Vale heard her horse long before he saw it. The sound came faintly through the timber, uneven and hurried, with long breaks between each heavy strike of hoof against frozen ground. No careful rider pushed an animal that hard on Grimshaw Peak. Not unless something worse than the weather was following close behind. Torren stopped beside the woodpile and listened. Bracken rose from the cabin porch. The old hound's body became still, and a warning sound formed deep inside his chest. Wind moved through the tall pines, bending their dark tops toward the east. Above them, the ashen spires were already fading behind a thick grey curtain. Snow was coming fast. Torren rested one hand near the hunting knife at his belt. He did not reach for the rifle leaning beside the cabin door. A frightened traveler might mistake that movement for a threat, and a dangerous one would reveal himself soon enough. The horse appeared between the trees. It was a fine grey mare, though there was nothing fine about her condition. Foam covered her neck. Mud darkened her legs to the knees. Her breathing came in painful bursts that filled the clearing with white clouds. The rider looked no better. She wore a dark green coat made for town roads and clean carriage steps. One sleeve was torn. Pine needles clung to the fabric, and the lower edge was heavy with dirt. Her hair had come loose during the climb, and now blew across her pale face. She looked cold enough to fall from the saddle, yet she remained upright as the mare entered the clearing. Torren knew who she was. Almost everyone in Cinderbrook knew Elowen Hartwell, even those who had never spoken to her. She was the daughter of Alaric Hartwell, whose land stretched from the lower forests to the banks of Silverjaw River. Her family owned the timber camp, the reservoir, the sawmill, and the safest supply road through the valley. People in town said she had grown up surrounded by polished furniture, servants, and men who lowered their voices when she entered a room. None of that explained what she was doing near the top of Grimshaw Peak with a storm closing behind her. Elowen pulled the mare to a stop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Torren stood in the clearing, wearing a worn elk-hide coat and dark wool shirt. His beard was rough, his hands marked by old cuts, and his boots carried the dirt of a man who had no reason to impress anyone. Bracken remained near him, staring at the stranger without blinking. Elowen looked at the cabin, then at the surrounding forest. Her eyes returned to Torren. She climbed down from the saddle. Her knees nearly failed when her boots touched the ground. She caught the saddle horn and held herself still until the weakness passed. Then she released the leather and crossed the clearing. Torren watched her carefully. She did not move like a woman who had become lost. She had chosen this place. She had climbed the worst trail on the mountain because she believed she would find him here. When she stopped before him, he noticed dried blood across her palms. The rains had rubbed through her gloves. Her lips had lost their color, but her gaze remained clear. Torren Vale? He gave a small nod. Elowen swallowed. Her breath shook once before she forced it steady. I need you to marry me. The wind moved between them. Bracken turned his head, as though even the dog understood something strange had entered the clearing. Torren studied her face. There was fear in it, but not confusion. She knew what she had said. She had likely repeated the words inside her mind through every mile of the climb. You rode up here to ask a stranger for marriage? We are not complete strangers. We have never spoken. You know who I am. I know your family owns half the valley. Her jaw tightened. And I know you left Cinderbrook 12 years ago. At that, something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the storm. Torren looked past her, toward the trail. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall through the branches. The mare lowered her head, trembling from exhaustion. Your horse needs warmth, he said. So do I. That is not the same as needing a husband. No, Elowen replied quietly. But one problem may kill me faster than the other. Torren held her gaze for another moment, then stepped past her and took the mare's reins. He led the animal toward the small shelter beside the cabin. Get inside. Elowen hesitated. Does that mean you will listen? It means I do not want a frozen body outside my door. The cabin was warm but plain. A stone fireplace filled one wall. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling. A narrow bed stood in the far corner. and a heavy table sat near the center of the room. Every object had a purpose. There were no paintings, no curtains, and nothing placed simply because it was pleasing to look at. Elowen entered slowly. Bracken followed and lay near the fire, though his eyes remained fixed on her. Torren added wood to the flames. He poured hot water over crushed leaves and bark in a tin cup, then pushed it across the table. "It is not tea," he said. "What is it?" "Something that will put heat back into you." Elowen wrapped both hands around the cup. Pain crossed her face when the metal touched her wounded palms, but she did not let go. Torren sat across from her. "Start talking." She took a careful drink before answering. "My father died 6 days ago." Torren's expression did not change, though he remembered Elowen Hartwell well enough. The man had always looked strong from a distance, with a straight back and a voice that carried across crowded rooms. "I heard he was ill." "He was, but no one expected him to die so quickly. And his death sent you up a mountain." "His will did." She reached inside her coat and removed a folded document protected by oilskin. She placed it on the table between them. "My father left the Hartwell holdings to me, but he placed a condition on my control of the estate. Before the winter court session, the property must belong to a legally recognized Hartwell household." Torren looked at her without understanding. Elowen continued, "My father believed the valley would never accept a woman controlling the timberlands, reservoir, and supply road alone. He thought marriage would protect me from political pressure." "Did he choose the husband too?" "No, but if I remain unmarried, the estate passes into temporary trust." "Controlled by whom?" "My cousin, Quentin Sutter." Torren knew that name as well. Quentin was seen often at card tables and rarely anywhere useful. "He loses money faster than most men earn it," Torren said. "He also owes Bramwell Crow more than he can ever repay." The name settled heavily in the cabin. For years, Torren had trained himself not to react when he heard it. He had almost succeeded. Outside, the wind struck the walls with a long, low moan. Elowen watched him closely. If Quentin controls the trust, Bramwell will control Quentin. He will take the reservoir first, then the supply road. Once he owns the water, and the only safe route through the lower pass, every farmer, timber worker, and settlement in the valley will depend on him. And you believe a husband stops that? The will is exact. If I am married before the court session, the estate remains under my control. Then marry someone from Cinderbrook. I cannot. You have no shortage of choices. I have no shortage of men who want the Hartwell name. Torren leaned back. They would marry the estate, she said, not me. The moment I signed the license, they would begin telling me where to sit, what to sell, and which contracts were too complicated for a woman to understand. You think I would be different? I think you would leave. The answer was so direct that Torren almost smiled. Elowen seemed to notice, but she did not soften her tone. That is why I chose you. You do not want my home. You do not want the sawmill, or the river, or a seat at some polished table. You want this mountain, and your own silence. I am offering payment for your name and your presence at the ceremony. After that, you may return here. Torren looked around the cabin. This life had taken years to build. Not the walls or the roof, but the distance. The distance from questions, promises, and the sound of people making plans that usually ended with someone else paying the price. You climbed all this way because you believe I can be bought. No, Elowen replied. I climbed because I believe you can be trusted. That answer disturbed him more. He rose from the table and crossed to the window. Snow had begun to gather on the ground. The grey mare stood safely beneath the shelter, eating slowly. Beyond her, the trail was already fading. You do not know me. I know you walked away from Cinderbrook after your brother died. Torren turned. Elowen held still, but the cup tightened between her hands. What do you know about Lysander? My father knew Bramwell was responsible for the expedition taking Deadman's Notch. Torren said nothing. The fire cracked behind them. Elowen spoke more carefully now. Bramwell wanted the mineral claim beyond the ridge, before word reached the other companies. He pressured the guide leader to change the route. The safe trail would have taken too long, so the party entered the notch after heavy snowfall. Torren remembered white sky, splintering ice, Lysander disappearing behind a wall of snow, so fast that Torren had not even heard him call out. You are saying Elowen Hartwell knew. He discovered it later. He collected letters, payment records, and survey notes. He believed Bramwell had also been stealing land through false debts. My father planned to expose him, but he died first. Yes, and now the proof is missing. It may be hidden in the estate records. My father trusted very few people near the end. Torren returned to the table. Why tell me this now? Because I knew money would not be enough. You came here planning to use my dead brother. Pain crossed her face. I came here knowing the truth might be the only thing that made you listen. Torren's eyes hardened. That is not better. No, she said, it is not. He expected an excuse. She offered none. That honesty kept him from sending her back into the storm. Elowen placed the cup down. Her hands had begun trembling again, though the cabin was warm. I do not expect you to forgive my father for keeping silent. I have not forgiven him either. But if Bramwell takes the estate, the proof will disappear forever. So will every chance of learning what truly happened. Torren stared into the fire. For 12 years he had believed the mountain had taken Lysander. It was easier to hate snow than a man. Snow could not be punished. It could not confess. It could not smile across a dining table while hiding blood beneath a clean cuff. Now Bramwell Crow stood behind the old grief. Torren hated that Elowen had brought the past to his door. He hated more that he believed her. What are the terms? Her expression changed slightly. You will marry me. I asked for the terms. She drew a careful breath. A payment when the license is signed. A second payment when the estate is secured. You will hold no claim over the Hartwell property. I will hold no claim over Wolfpine Clearing. We will appear together before the court if required. Once the legal challenge is finished, we may end the marriage quietly. And until then, you may live here. Torren glanced toward the snow-covered window. The town will not accept it quietly. I know. Bramwell will fight. I know that too. He may come after you. He already has. The words were soft. Torren looked at her more carefully. What happened? Quentin brought Bramwell to the house after my father died. Bramwell offered to solve the problem by marrying me himself. When I refused, he reminded me that accidents happen on mountain roads. Torren's jaw tightened. You rode here alone after that. I trusted no one else. That was foolish. It was necessary. Those are often the same thing. A faint trace of warmth returned to her eyes. It was not quite amusement, but something close. Torren walked to the hearth and added another log. He had spent 12 years protecting his peace from the valley below. Now the valley had climbed to his door, wearing torn green wool and carrying his brother's ghost. He could refuse. By morning, Elowen would descend alone. Bramwell would gain the Hartwell lands. The evidence would vanish. Torren could remain in his cabin, untouched by all of it. Yet he knew untouched was not the same as innocent. You take the bed, he said. Elowen stared at him. I will sleep near the fire. We leave when the sky clears. Her shoulders lowered, as if a great weight had shifted inside her. Then you agree. I agree to ride down and see the documents. If the will says what you claim, and if your lawyer confirms the arrangement, I will sign. Relief passed across her face, quiet and almost painful. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. He moved toward the door to check the horse. Behind him, Elowen spoke again. Torren. He paused. I am sorry about Lysander. The name filled the cabin with a silence that felt older than the mountain. Torren did not turn. So am I. The storm passed during the night, leaving the world buried beneath fresh snow. At dawn, the ashen spires caught the first light and turned pale gold above the dark forest. Torren prepared the horses, while Elowen stood near the cabin, wrapped in a spare wool coat that reached nearly to her ankles. Bracken moved between them, restless and alert. The trail down Grimshaw Peak was narrow and slick. Torren rode ahead, choosing each turn with care. Elowen followed without complaint, though exhaustion showed in the way she held her shoulders. As they descended, the forest changed. The pines grew thinner, the air became warmer, and the distant shape of Cinderbrook appeared beneath a layer of chimney smoke. Torren had not seen the town in 12 years. It had grown. New roofs filled the valley. Railroad tracks cut across the southern edge. Tall brick buildings stood where smaller wooden shops had once leaned against muddy roads. The sight brought no comfort. When they entered the main street, conversation began to fade. People turned from shop windows. A wagon driver stopped in the road. Two men outside the saloon lowered their cups and stared. Elowen Hartwell had returned from the mountains beside Torren Vale. By the time they reached the courthouse, half the street was watching. A man stepped from the boardwalk before them. Bramwell Crowe was dressed in a dark coat with polished boots untouched by the mud. Silver threaded his hair near the temples. His face carried the calm confidence of someone used to entering rooms, already certain he would control them. His eyes moved from Elowen to Torren. "So this is where you went." Elowen kept her hands on the reins. "Move aside, Bramwell. You frightened the entire household. I left a note. You left an insult. That was not my purpose, though I am pleased you received one." A murmur moved through the watching crowd. Bramwell's expression remained smooth, but something cold entered his eyes. "You have made a serious mistake. I am correcting one." He stepped closer and reached for the mare's bridle. Torren moved his horse between them. The motion was calm, almost lazy, but it forced Bramwell back. "Do not touch her horse," Torren said. Bramwell looked up at him. "You must be Vale. You must be in the way." For the first time, the banker's calm mask slipped. "This matter belongs to the Hartwell family. Elowen asked you to move." Bramwell glanced toward the people watching from the boardwalk. Too many eyes were present for open violence. He slowly stepped aside. "You will regret this," he told Elowen. She guided her mare past him. "Stand in line." Inside the courthouse, Magistrate Orson Kittredge looked as though the morning had suddenly become far more difficult than expected. Niles Pembroke was already waiting with the will, the marriage papers, and a face that revealed nothing. Torren read every page. The condition was real. So was Elowen's claim. The ceremony was brief. There were no flowers, no music, and no family gathered close. Only the quiet scratch of a pen, the soft breathing of the witnesses, and the strange weight of words neither of them had expected to say. When Torren was asked whether he accepted Elowen as his wife, he looked at her. She stood straight, but he saw fear beneath her calm. Not fear of him, fear that even now, something would stop the plan. "I do," he said. Elowen's breath eased. They signed the record. Niles folded a copy of the document and placed it inside his case. "It must be delivered to the county court before tomorrow evening," he explained. "Until then, Bramwell may attempt to challenge the filing." "He will do more than challenge it," Torren said. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Elowen gave Torren the first payment. The leather pouch felt heavy in his hand. "You have completed your part," she told him. "You may return to Wolfpine Clearing." Torren looked toward the street. Bramwell was gone. That troubled him more than if the man had remained. Elowen climbed into a waiting carriage with Niles and left for the Hartwell mansion. Torren watched until the carriage disappeared around the corner. Then he walked toward the stable where his horse and Bracken waited. The mountain was only a few hours away. The gold in his hand could repair the cabin, buy supplies, and allow him to live through several winters without worry. He had done what she asked. Nothing required him to remain. Inside the stable, Bracken stood beside the horse with his body rigid. A shape moved in the shadows. Then another. Two men stepped between Torren and the open door. One was broad and thick-necked, with a damaged nose and a revolver low on his hip. The other was thin, pale, and smiling, as though he already knew how the meeting would end. Torren recognized them from Elowen's description. Rufus Kane and Jebediah Pike. Rufus closed the stable door behind him. "Mr. Crowe sends his regards." Torren slowly placed the pouch of gold on a wooden crate. Bracken's growl deepened. Jebediah rested one hand near his weapon. "Nothing personal," he said. "We only need the marriage corrected before sunset." Torren looked from one man to the other. Outside, the town continued as though nothing had changed. Wheels crossed the mud. A church bell rang somewhere beyond the roofs. Far above Cinderbrook, the ashen spires waited beneath a clear and silent sky. For 12 years, Torren had believed the mountain was the only place where danger showed its true face. Now he understood that he had been wrong. The most dangerous predators wore clean coats, carried written orders, and expected decent men to look away. Rufus Kane drew first. His hand dropped toward the revolver at his side, but Torren was already moving. He seized the wooden crate between them and drove it forward with both hands. The edge struck Rufus across the knees and sent him crashing into the side of a stall. His revolver fired into the roof, startling every horse in the building. Jebediah Pike stepped back and pulled his own weapon. Bracken lunged. The hound caught the sleeve of Jebediah's coat and dragged his arm downward just as he fired. The shot buried itself in the floorboards near Torren's boot. Torren crossed the distance before Jebediah could aim again. He caught the man's wrist, twisted until the revolver dropped, and drove his shoulder into Jebediah's chest. They struck the stable wall hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Rufus pushed himself upright, blood running from his lip. He grabbed a length of iron chain hanging beside the stall and swung it toward Torren's head. Torren ducked. The chain struck a wooden post with a sharp crack. Before Rufus could pull it back, Torren caught the loose end and wrapped it once around his forearm. He pulled with all his weight. Rufus stumbled forward. Torren met him with a heavy blow beneath the jaw. The man dropped into the hay and did not move again. Jebediah tore free from Bracken and reached for the fallen revolver. Torren placed his boot on the weapon before he could take it. Jebediah froze. Torren looked down at him. "Who sent you?" Jebediah stared toward Rufus, perhaps hoping the larger man would rise and answer for him. Rufus remained still. "You already know," Jebediah muttered. "I want to hear you say it." "Bramwell Crow, what were your orders?" Jebediah's face tightened. Torren pressed his boot harder against the revolver. "Kill you," Jebediah said. "Burn the court record. Bring Mrs. Vale back to the Hartwell house before dark." The words felt strange in the stable. Mrs. Vale. Torren had heard the magistrate speak them, but they had seemed like part of the ceremony, nothing more than language written for another kind of life. Now the name carried danger. He searched Rufus and found a folded sheet inside the man's coat. Bramwell's signature rested beneath a short set of instructions. The paper was clear enough to hang him if the law still had any courage left. Torren placed the note inside his coat. "You are going to stay here," he told Jebediah. "When the stable owner returns, you will tell him Rufus fell from a horse." Jebediah gave him a confused look. "Why would I do that?" Torren picked up the revolver and emptied the cartridges into his palm. "Because the next story will be worse for you." He tossed the empty weapon into the water trough and called Bracken. The gold remained on the crate. Torren looked at it for a long moment. That pouch had been the price of his freedom. It was enough to repair his roof, replace his worn traps, and buy silence for years. He tied it beneath his coat and left the stable. Rain began before he reached the Hartwell mansion. The storm came from the west, cold and heavy, darkening the road beneath his horse. By the time Torren climbed the hill above Cinderbrook, water ran from the brim of his hat and soaked through the shoulders of his coat. The Hartwell mansion rose against the grey sky, all tall windows and black stone. Light burned in several rooms, though the house felt strangely still. Torren saw 3 horses tied near the entrance. None belonged to Elowen. He dismounted and handed the reins to no one. Bracken followed him up the steps. Inside the mansion, Bramwell Crow stood in the front hall with Elowen before him. Quentin Sutter waited near the staircase, pale and nervous. 2 armed men blocked the doors. Niles Pembroke was nowhere in sight. Elowen held a small pistol in both hands. The weapon trembled, but her eyes did not. Bramwell seemed almost amused. "You have nowhere to go," he told her. "The marriage record will be ash before midnight. Your mountain man has already taken his money and vanished." Elowen's expression remained still, though fear moved beneath it. "You know very little about Torren. I know exactly what he is. A lonely man who can be purchased for the right price." The front doors opened behind him. Bramwell turned. Torren stepped into the hall, with rain running from his coat. Bracken entered beside him, his teeth showing. For the first time, Bramwell looked uncertain. "You were saying something about my price," Torren said. Elowen's pistol lowered a fraction. "You came back." Torren did not look away from Bramwell. "I never left." One of the armed men reached toward his coat. Bracken growled. The man's hand stopped. Torren removed Bramwell's written order and tossed it onto the floor between them. "I found this on Rufus." Bramwell glanced at the paper but made no move to retrieve it. "A forged note proves nothing. It proves enough for the sheriff." Bramwell smiled, though there was less confidence in it now. "The sheriff understands who keeps this town alive." "The river keeps this town alive," Elowen said. "The workers keep it alive. You only collect from them." Quentin shifted near the stairs. Bramwell turned his anger toward him. "Do not stand there like a frightened child. Tell her what happens when the trust passes to you." Quentin's mouth opened, but no words came. Elowen looked at her cousin. "You knew about this?" "I did not know he meant to hurt anyone," Quentin whispered. "You knew enough." Bramwell stepped toward her. Torren moved once. That was all it took. He placed himself between Bramwell and Elowen without raising his voice or drawing a weapon. "You will leave this house." Bramwell looked up at him. "This house does not belong to you." Torren glanced toward Elowen. She held Bramwell's gaze. "It does not belong to you either." Bramwell's face hardened. For one dangerous second, Torren thought the man might order his guards to shoot. Instead, Bramwell adjusted his coat. "This is not finished." "No," Elowen replied, "but you are finished here." Bramwell turned and walked out. His men followed. Quentin remained behind until Torren looked at him. Then he hurried after them into the rain. The doors closed. Silence filled the hall. Elowen set the pistol on a table. The strength left her hand so quickly that the weapon nearly slipped from her fingers. Torren crossed the room. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "He said you were gone." "I know." For one moment I believed him. Torren's expression softened. "You paid me to go." "I did." "You should not be surprised when a man takes you at your word." She looked at him. "Then why are you here?" Torren thought about the stable, the written order, and the ease with which he could have ridden north. Because Bramwell changed the terms. That answer was true, but it was not complete. Elowen seemed to understand that. She did not press him. Torren stayed at the mansion that night. He refused the large guest room and slept on the floor of the study with his rifle beside him. The house creaked around him, filled with unfamiliar sounds. Pipes groaned inside the walls. Wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock marked every hour. He slept badly. At dawn, he found Elowen in the kitchen, attempting to open a jar with her wounded hands. Torren took it from her. "You should have those cleaned." "They were cleaned yesterday. They were wrapped badly." Her eyes narrowed. "Are all mountain men this pleasant in the morning?" "I would not know. I avoid them." A faint smile touched her mouth. It disappeared when he reached for her hand. The skin across her palms had split where the rains had cut through her gloves. Torren cleaned the wounds with warm water and pressed a dark herbal salve into them. Elowen drew a sharp breath. "That burns." "It is supposed to." "That does not make it better. It makes it useful." He wrapped her hands with clean cloth. His touch remained careful. Elowen watched him without speaking. "You learned this alone?" she asked. "My mother taught me before she died." Lysander was always injuring himself. The name created a small silence between them. Elowen looked down at the new bandages. "My father should have told you what he knew." "Yes. He believed he needed stronger proof." "He was wrong." "I know." Torren tied the final knot. "You do not need to defend him to me." "I am not defending him." Her voice became quieter. "I am trying to understand him, without becoming like him." Torren looked at her. That was the moment he began to believe the estate might deserve saving. Niles arrived later that morning with confirmation that the marriage record had been secured. Bramwell's men had tried to enter the courthouse during the night, but Orson Kittredge had moved the ledger into a locked county vault after receiving Elowen's warning. The legal danger had weakened. The practical danger had not. Over the next several days, Bramwell closed his hand around the Hartwell estate without entering the property again. Merchants in Cinderbrook refused to send flour, lamp oil, or medicine. The blacksmith delayed repairs. The bank froze the estate accounts while Bramwell's lawyers questioned the marriage. Then the workers at Ravencut Camp stopped the saws. Deke Holloway came to the mansion himself. The foreman was broad, grey-bearded, and uncomfortable inside a room filled with expensive furniture. "The men are willing to work," he told Elowen, "but they have families. Bramwell says your bank credit is dead. They cannot swing axes on promises." Elowen sat behind her father's desk, surrounded by ledgers. "The railroad payment comes after delivery, and the timber cannot be delivered until the men are paid." Torren stood near the window. "How much?" Deke looked at him. "For 1 week? For enough time to finish the contract." Deke named the amount. It was nearly everything inside Torren's gold pouch. Elowen shook her head. "No." Torren looked toward her. "That money is yours," she said. "I will not take it back." "You are not taking it. You earned it. I have not earned anything if Bramwell takes the valley tomorrow." Torren left before she could argue further. At Ravencut Camp, the workers gathered near the silent mill. The tall saw blades stood motionless beneath the roof, their teeth dark with old sap. Torren placed the gold on a rough wooden table before Deke. The sound of the coins drew every eye. "This is real," Torren said. "Not a banknote, not a future promise." Deke picked up one coin and bit the edge. A few men laughed quietly. "If you work," Torren continued, "you are paid tonight. If you walk away, Bramwell owns the mill by winter." One of the workers crossed his arms. "Why do you care?" Torren looked toward the distant ridge. "I do not care about the mill." "Then what?" Torren thought of Elowen standing in the mansion with a shaking pistol and refusing to lower her eyes. "I care who controls it." Deke closed his hand around the coin. A few minutes later, the first saw began to turn. By noon, Ravencut Camp was alive again. When Torren returned to the mansion, Elowen was waiting on the steps. "You used all of it." "Not all. How much is left?" "Enough for coffee." She looked angry, but her eyes shone. "You traded years of security for my payroll." Torren dismounted. "I had security before you came up the mountain." "And you gave it up?" "No." He handed the reins to a worker. "I learned it was not worth as much as I thought." Winter settled over the valley. The railroad contract was completed. The estate received payment, and the bank could no longer justify freezing every account. Bramwell lost the economic fight, but he did not disappear. For several quiet weeks, Torren and Elowen lived beneath the same roof, like two careful strangers, learning the shape of each other's lives. Elowen worked from dawn until late evening, reviewing contracts and meeting workers. Torren repaired fences, inspected the reservoir road, and watched every stranger who approached the property. At night, they often sat in the study near the fire. Elowen read reports while Torren carved pieces of cedar. Some evenings they barely spoke. The silence did not feel empty. Then Niles Pembroke vanished. His horse returned to Cinderbrook without him. The same night, someone entered the county office and stole the original Hartwell charter. Elowen found a message beneath the mansion door. Bramwell demanded that she surrender the estate before dawn. If she refused, the charter would be destroyed and Niles would die. Torren read the note twice. "He wants us to follow. He wants the evidence too," Elowen said. "My father hid it near Frostfang Ridge. You know where? An old survey station beyond Deadman's Notch." Torren's body became still. Elowen saw the change in him. "That is where Lysander died." "Yes. We do not have to go through the notch. The other route takes 2 days. Niles may not have 2 days." Torren began preparing supplies. When he returned from the stable, Elowen was gone. Her horse was missing. Torren found her tracks leading north. He stood in the snow with anger rising through him. She knew the ridge poorly. A storm was gathering, and Bramwell wanted her alone. Bracken lifted his nose and caught the trail. Torren mounted. They entered Deadman's Notch near dusk. The cliffs narrowed around them until the sky became a thin grey line. Snow covered every ledge. The air carried the deep silence that came before an avalanche. Torren had not returned since Lysander's death. Memories appeared with every turn. A broken tree, a wall of blue ice, the place where he had dug until his hands bled, and still failed to find his brother before nightfall. For years, he had believed leaving the valley meant escaping that day. Now he understood he had carried the notch inside him. Bracken moved ahead, following Elowen's horse. Torren forced himself onward. They reached the survey station after dark. The door hung open. Inside, Niles lay tied near the wall. Blood darkened one side of his face, but he was alive. Torren cut the ropes. "Elowen?" he asked. "She freed me," Niles said weakly. "She found Alaric's evidence. Bramwell caught her outside." "Where did he take her?" "The reservoir channel." Torren helped Niles onto a horse and gave him the leather case containing the recovered papers. "Ride down the southern trail. You cannot face all of them alone." "I am not alone." Bracken stood in the doorway, staring into the storm. At Frostfang Ridge, Bramwell had placed explosives along the old reservoir channel. Rufus Kane stood near the charges with a rifle. Jebediah Pike watched the snow above them with growing fear. Elowen was bound beside the gate controls. Bramwell held the Hartwell charter over a lantern flame. "Your father spent his life believing paper could protect him," he said. "It cannot protect you either. You are destroying the valley to own it. I am clearing away weak hands. You created the avalanche that killed Lysander Vale." Bramwell smiled. "I chose speed over caution. Men make those decisions every day." Torren heard the words from the darkness. He stepped into the lantern light. Bramwell's smile vanished. Rufus raised his rifle. Bracken struck him from the side. The shot went wide. Rufus fell against the rocks, fighting the hound while Torren rushed toward Bramwell. Jebediah backed away from the explosives. "The ridge is moving," he warned. "We need to leave." Bramwell ignored him and drew his pistol. Elowen threw herself against the gate lever. The heavy mechanism shifted. Water pressure changed inside the channel, pulling the current away from the damaged wall. Bramwell fired at her. Torren struck his arm before the weapon settled. The bullet entered the snowbank above them. A deep crack rolled through the ridge. Everyone stopped. Snow broke loose high above Frostfang. Jebediah ran. Rufus tried to rise, but Bracken held him down. Bramwell stared upward, finally understanding. Torren cut Elowen's ropes. "Behind the stone wall," he told her. They ran as the mountain began to fall. The avalanche swept across the ridge with a sound larger than thunder. Bramwell tried to reach the survey trail, but the snow caught him before he had taken 10 steps. For one moment, Torren saw him standing alone against the white wall. Then he vanished. Torren pulled Elowen behind the stone gate support and covered her with his body. Snow, branches, and ice tore across the channel. The world became dark. When silence finally returned, Elowen opened her eyes. Torren was still above her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She touched his face. "No." Bracken emerged from the snow nearby, limping but alive. Rufus was later found injured beneath a broken tree. Jebediah surrendered in Cinderbrook and agreed to testify against him. The evidence Niles carried exposed Bramwell's false debts, stolen land claims, and responsibility for the expedition through Deadman's Notch. Quentin lost every legal claim to the Hartwell Trust. Orson Kittredge entered the recovered charter into the county record beside Torren and Elowen's marriage license. By spring, the valley had changed. Elowen gave Ravencut workers fair contracts and a share of the mill profits. The Silverjaw River remained open to the farmers and settlements that depended on it. Mining was banned near the unstable ridges of the Ashen Spires. Torren watched it all from a distance. When the last legal challenge ended, he packed his saddle. Elowen found him outside the mansion. "The estate is safe," he said. "You do not need me here." She held the original private agreement between them. "I told you I would never make this marriage another cage. You kept your word. So I will keep it again." She handed him the paper. "You are free to return to Wolfpine Clearing. The remaining payment is waiting in the house." Torren looked toward the mountains. For 12 years, he had wanted nothing more than to return to silence. Now the thought felt strangely cold. He took the agreement and tore it once down the center. Then again, the pieces fell into the mud between them. Elowen watched him. "What are you doing?" "Ending the arrangement." Her face became still. Torren stepped closer. The arrangement said I would leave when the danger ended. Yes. I am not staying because of danger. Then why? He looked at the woman who had climbed Grimshaw Peak alone, crossed Deadman's Notch in a storm, and stood against men who had spent their lives underestimating her. Because my home is no longer only on the mountain. Elowen's eyes filled, though she smiled. You are certain. I have spent enough years being certain of the wrong thing. She reached for his hand. Torren did not return to Wolfpine Clearing alone. In the years that followed, he and Elowen divided their lives between the mountain cabin and the Hartwell estate. She protected the valley through contracts, planning, and patience. He guarded the forests and passes from anyone who believed the mountains existed, only to be taken. Bracken spent his winters near the mansion fire, and his summers sleeping beneath the pines. People in Cinderbrook told many versions of their story. Some said Elowen Hartwell climbed the ashen spires looking for a husband. Others said Torren Vale came down from the mountain to avenge his brother. Neither story was completely true. Elowen had gone searching for freedom. Torren had believed freedom meant needing no one. In the end, they found something neither had expected. Not rescue, not ownership, not a promise made because the law required it. They found a life chosen freely by two people who had every reason to stand alone, but decided they were stronger, standing together.